And the UK Supreme Court has concluded its third and final day of hearings on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's controversial suspension of Parliament. The country's top court will decide if Mr. Johnson acted unlawfully in advising the Queen to suspend Parliament for 5 weeks in a bid to force through a no-deal Brexit.
If he loses, he may be forced to recall Parliament earlier than scheduled. This will give lawmakers extra time to scrutinise his Brexit plans.
And ahead of the court's verdict, Mr. Johnson's administration has delivered new proposals on Brexit with the EU. Now, for the latest, Ollie Barrett joins us from London. Ollie, do we know anything about these proposed changes in these new Brexit documents?
No, the UK not giving us much detail about what is in what they call these confidential documents that they've submitted to the European Union. This comes as multiple EU and European officials have insisted that Britain needs to submit detailed legal texts if it is to get a Brexit deal by October the 31st, but Britain also saying that it hasn't yet submitted those formal legal documents with regards to the Irish border backstop. It says it will do so when it's ready, and it says it won't be doing so according to what it describes as an artificial deadline. So there is certainly some tension building between Britain and the European Union. That may be because we're headed towards the business end of negotiations. It may be because negotiations aren't going very well at all. But when you do get closer and closer to the end game with regards to a deal when it comes to Brexit or any other talks, discussions, negotiations with the European Union, things do get very tense indeed. So perhaps a sign that things are stepping up in terms of intensity.
Well, let's turn our attention then to the suspension of Parliament. What were the arguments presented to the Supreme Court today, and any idea of which way the court is leaning?
Yeah, we've been hearing lots from both sides of the argument when it comes to the legal teams here and the lawyers. The hearing is still going on, by the way. There's another hour or so to be completed after the lunch break here in London. The opponents of Boris Johnson and their legal teams believe that it's unlawful to suspend Parliament in this way. They believe that Boris Johnson has misled the Queen in their view, and they also argue that it's quite within the remit of the Supreme Court to make a decision on this. The government's legal team says it's not, and says that Parliament's been suspended because it was the end of one legislative term and Boris Johnson's government wants to start another one in the middle of October. We have been hearing some briefing from government sources over the last couple of days that lead you to believe that Downing Street might be bracing itself for a defeat here, but it's very hard to read the judges. They all have their poker faces on. One possible outcome that Downing Street is preparing itself for is that they don't see a full-scale defeat here. They're not required to withdraw, to recall Parliament earlier than planned, but that the Supreme Court sends a very strong message that Boris Johnson would not be allowed to suspend Parliament again for a long period to try and force through a no-deal Brexit. That is one of many options that we could see unfold over the coming days, whenever it is that the Supreme Court makes its final decision.
Many thanks for keeping an eye on it for us. Ollie Barrett speaking to us from London.